Dr. Abhishek Bose is a PhD in comparative literature and teaches in the Department of Comparative Indian Language and Literature at the University of Calcutta, Kolkata. His research interests include, among other things, Bhakti movement with special emphasis on Vaishnavism, aesthetics and literary theory, performance studies. He is currently leading two research projects: Lives of a Text, Traditions of Ramayana Performance in India and Thailand, and the Vaishnava Encyclopedia project. For the past few years, he has been working on a book on Madhavendra Puri and the prehistory of Chaitanya Vaishnavism. He is also engaged in exploring various genres of performance as a practitioner. So, welcome, sir, and please take over the session. Dr. Abhishek Bose.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Goswami, for your kind words. And I thank the organizers, the Bhakti Vedanta Research Center, St. Xavier's College, Stockholm University, and all the collaborators. Uh, Actually, at the outset, let me begin with a statutory warning. I am still kind of struggling with the title, although it is given by me: Connecting Cultures, Comparing Literatures. Comparing and connecting literatures and cultures. How to do that? The more I think about it, I see myself looking at a dark, spiraling void, and hence I am scared to the core, especially when I am presenting in front of such an erudite audience of scholars, teachers, educationists. But I have to accept this predicament, and please bear with me. Being a student of comparative literature, it is naturally expected of me that I would present an overview of the discipline, a trajectory, the necessity and practicability of the discipline, and so on. It could have been done. Who has used the term comparative literature for the first time in Germany or England? In which year? Then how it acquired momentum in the US of A. Thereafter, how the discipline spread its roots in India or Asia for that matter. All these things could have been outlined in the course of this presentation. But my sincere apologies, I am not going to do any of those things in today's presentation. Firstly, because all that information is available on any self respecting search engine. So, you don't need to bear with me for that second hand information. And secondly, I do not find it appealing or interesting enough to do. Instead, what I offer you a conversation, an intimate conversation, a conversation, or as I prefer to call it, Shanglap, Samlap. Though Samlap is often translated as dialogue, it is much more than that. Etymologically, it is Sam plus Lap, the root Lap plus A. Here, Sam signifies Sampurna or complete, and Samyaka or proper or perfect. The root Lap means the act of speaking, to speak. So the meaning of the term Sanglapa becomes a complete or proper conversation. And a conversation or discussion can be complete only when it is a discussion between two or more people. Now the question is, who is the second person with whom I am supposed to have this conversation here? The question can be approached from more than one way. Firstly, the people in the audience, that means you can be that person. Secondly, this can be a conversation with my own self, as any conversation primarily is a conversation with your own self. And thirdly, this can be a conversation between me and my discipline. Who I am, who is this me? I am a student of comparative literature. I have done some researches in the field, and now I am teaching in a department called Comparative Indian Language and Literature. So, in short, I am someone who has been associated with the discipline for quite some time through a host of relationships, and who is still trying to figure out what comparative literature means. What does it entail? And the relationships make the conversation intimate, because apparently a relation is something which takes us from the exterior to the interior. At least that is what we like to believe. So much for intimacy. As soon as I say this, someone might interject. If you do not have any clear idea about what comparative literature means, then what are you teaching your students in your classrooms? Or what are you presenting to those unfortunate souls attending such and such FDPs and your talk? I have rehearsed one answer for this question, but before that, please tell me, does a relationship have any chance of survival? A relationship, does it have any chance of survival if you already know all about your partner, the other person in the relationship? I think the uncertainty whether my beloved is going to say yes or no to my proposition, that uncertainty is the driving force behind any kind of relationship. And my sympathies to those who claim or who have known all about their partners all along. My sympathies. This statement about human relationships can be extended to include our relationships with objects or ideas, even.
Sir,
Therefore,
sorry to interrupt you. Sir,
yes,
could you
please.
please increase the volume of your mic?
Oh, it's at 100%.
One
Is it
speaker,
better now?
yeah, one participant has written that your voice is coming in a low tune. So hope it's fine. Yeah, thank you, sir, and I'm extremely sorry to
No,
interrupt
no,
you.
no, 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 no. It's okay. So I was saying this statement about human relationships can be extended to include our relationships with objects or ideas. Therefore, it is equally applicable to my relationship with comparative literature or the idea of comparative literature. One of my teachers used to say that the problem about any idea, all ideas, is that an idea cannot exist in the void. That is to say, an idea necessarily has to be about an individual or an object. It is consciousness about someone or something. It is not consciousness in itself. Consciousness is always about something or someone. The interesting thing is the moment I think of or I think about my own self, someone or something else will enter my thought. I cannot think about my own self without thinking of the other, and vice versa. The self and the other are always simultaneous. They cannot exist without each other. Now, if the self and the other are considered as two extremes, the self and the other, then the valley between them can be the field of comparative literature. Why? Even if you take the popular notion of comparative literature, what is that? That of comparison between two texts, two genres, two cultures, that is comparative literature, or popular belief is that about comparative literature. Then you are actually engaging with the other, because you cannot make any comparisons unless you have at least one other entity. You need at least two entities to compare. Still better, your journey would be from exclusion to inclusion. Excuse me. In other words, you have to forge relationships. You have to become many from one. As the Upanishad says, Ekoham Bahusyam. We can say that this plurality is the foundation of comparative literature. Because if there is no plurality, no difference, how do you get multiple phenomena to compare? Maybe you are looking for similarities or resemblances among literatures or cultures. You are looking for similarities, but to begin with, you have to start with differences. You need very badly differences, otherwise, you cannot start to compare. If you are narcissistic or self complacent, you cannot practice comparative literature by any means. Thus, plurality becomes both the way and the aim of comparative literature. Both the way and the aim. As one of my favorite poets, Zbigniew Herbert, has beautifully captured in his poem Elegy of Portingus, and I quote, "It is not for us to greet each other or bid farewell. We live on archipelagos, and that water, these words, what can they do? What can they do, Prince? We live on archipelagos." We all know that India is necessarily pluralistic, and yet you cannot ever possibly overemphasize upon this fact of pluralism. This is not a choice for us. This is our situation. This is a given. Your mother tongue is Maithili, Nepali, Gujarati, or Oriya, and you study a degree course in English or Sanskrit or Hindi. Say you are a student in a Sanskrit department, and yet the moment you try to read a play in your syllabus, you have to learn two or more forms of Prakrita or Apabhramsha languages. The context is such that the characters are supposed to use different languages within the same play, and it is expected from the audience that they will relate to that multilinguality without any effort, with ease. You are a student of Bangla or Hindi literature, say, but you have to have your own share of Shakespeare or Maupassant, not as additional references. You would not be able to understand the course of Indian dramaturgy without considering the reception of Shakespeare. Without O. Henry or Maupassant, you cannot grasp the phenomena of short stories in India at all. In fact, we have reasons to believe that outside the syllabi, Shakespeare has been more popular in India than his home turf in England. And if you look at the syllabi of English literature at any Indian university, you will see that Rabindranath Tagore, Amrita Pritam, or Sadat Hasan Manto have found their proud places in those syllabi. In translation, so to speak, if you study any Indian language or literature, you have to essentially engage with other languages and other literatures. That is, other people. And is this plurilingualism limited only to the syllabi. You cannot live for one day if you are not using more than one language for your everyday purposes. We are constantly switching between codes, dialects, languages, and scripts every day, wherever we are. You are riding a cab, buying 1 kilogram of potato, watching your favorite films or listening to your favorite songs, or checking even your WhatsApp updates. And all the while, you are practicing plurilingualism without even knowing the term. I have been told that the participants in this FDP course, they are located across the map of India, and I think that all of them would relate to what I am saying now. Therefore, plurilingualism and pluriculturalism are part and parcel of our very existence, of every individual who is an Indian. That is why I would like to state that there can be no single literature in India. I know there might be many esteemed scholars from so called single literature disciplines present here, and please do not take it otherwise. If you come to think about it, even for the basic purpose of finishing your curriculum, can you really restrict yourself to any one language or literature? Our respective syllabi, be it Hindi, Bangla, Maithili, Gujarati, our respective syllabi already contain elements from other language cultures, and the disciplinary boundaries are not at all watertight. We cannot afford to be single, pun intended. Basically, our languages and literatures keep transgressing all such boundaries of imagined singularity as they are alive. And because they are living, they are organisms, they enter into relationships, into what we have termed as sanglap. On the level of language, new words and concepts from other cultures are added every day. In literature, texts are translated, adapted, transmitted all the while. If you remember just one example, the word time has gained currency in most parts of India going by the popular usage. It has replaced samay, kal, kshan, and it has become an everyday Indian word, time. For text transmission, I have one favorite example. In many Indian languages, the translations of the Bangla novels of Sharat Chandra Chatterjee are so popular that people often think that Sharat Chandra belongs to their own language and they will be very upset if you tell them otherwise. I had one such curious encounter with a Malayali fan of Sharat Chandra once. Therefore, the texts and concepts travel to and fro, inter and intra-linguistic ways. All attempts of compartmentalizing literatures within singularity are bound to fail. Basically, this notion of single literature departments are primarily an impact of colonization. The European nations were mostly uniliterary, one culture, one nation. Spain is identifiable with Spanish, England with English, France with French, and so on. When Europe turned towards a system of one nation, one language, we have modeled our nationalism on that basis. Therefore, the education system that was being established here also adhered to the single literature department model and the concept of nationalism inherent within that system. But there is no one language called Indian for India or Bharatiya for Bharat. There is no language called Indian. Of course, Our cultures and languages were always interacting among themselves. Of course, there were registers like Gaudiya, Oriya, Maithili, Audhi, Brajbhasha. I am talking about this side of the Vindhya. But there was no absolute borders between two such registers. That is why the earliest example of any literary compositions in the Bhasha, modern Indian languages, the Charjapad, they are claimed by Bangla, claimed by Maithili, Odia, Ahomiya, and other people. These conflicting claims of owning Charjapad actually represent one brilliant moment in our literary history. A moment when some compositions, some literary compositions at that, can be considered by each as their own, a moment of shared heritages. In fact, this diversity was present on every level, even on the level of scripts. Just one moment. Even on the level of scripts. For instance, Sanskrit as a language never had any Sanskrit script. Today we accord that status to what has been termed as Devanagari, but it is a relatively recent phenomenon. If you look at the old manuscripts composed in Sanskrit language all over India, we have Bandhanadi among us, she can tell you better. Uh, if you look at those Sanskrit manuscripts, you will find that it is always written in the locally popular script. Nagari, Oriya, Gaudi, Sarada, whichever comes in handy. Many of the Sanskrit manuscripts written by the Goswamis of Vrindavan in the 16th century will attest to this fact. They are writing in Sanskrit, Sanskrit as a language, but using the scripts they are comfortable with. And this is not only about the scripts. The Chaitanya Charitamrita is being translated into Brajbhasha, or Sanskrit commentaries of Chaitanya Charitamrita are being composed when the usual practice was the other way around, creating Bhasha commentaries for Sanskrit texts. But for Chaitanya Charitamrita, we are getting Sanskrit commentaries for a Bhasha text, a Bangla text. Now, Maithil Vidyapati is becoming essential part of other literary worlds. Chaitanya Dev is singing songs in Bangla, Sanskrit, and Odia with equal ease on the eve of Ratha Yatra at Puri. I can go on giving hundreds of such examples, like when Rasul Upanishad in Sanskrit is being composed on Hazrat Muhammad, Nabiji. But I think my point has been adequately established already. And this is not only true, this pluralism is not only true about literary texts, about written texts. In fact, the term literature itself becomes inadequate and problematic in the Indian situation. The term Sahitya is more inclusive for that matter. Sahitya. Sahitya doesn't necessarily mean something written. It can be verbal, it can be spoken, it can be performative, anything. Literature etymologically means written words, but Sahitya can include Shruti and Lipi both, written texts as well as performative genres. This is important because in our culture, written and spoken were never mutually exclusive. From the very beginning, both existed in a continuum of knowledge transmissions, paramparas, complementing each other perhaps. Think about the parampara transmission. I was thrilled when I found that a Bijak of Kabir has been translated verbatim by Lalon Fakir in Bangla. Just imagine, both Kabir Das and Lalan Fakir were supposedly illiterates. They were separated by at least 3 centuries and hundreds of miles, and yet a verse of Kabir Das from Kashi find its way to a Lalan Fakir in interior Bengal. Sahitya can encompass all these knowledge systems and their transmissions with all the differences. This pluralism is not only limited to the ancient period or the medieval literary genres flourished during the Bhakti movement. If that was the case, then the emergence of modern genres like novel or short story or literary movements like Romanticism or Realism or Dalit Sahitya in all Indian languages could not be explained. So there is a connection, a commonality. The interactions among literatures, cultures, people have never stopped. It is an ongoing and continuous process. But we should be careful enough not to look at this as influence or impact of one language culture on the other. That will lead us to major, minor, large, small, important, unimportant, these kind of hierarchies and also hegemonies. Instead, we can return to the concept of the valley between the self and the other. If I am not bent upon establishing my supremacy and superiority over others, only then I can understand the relationships that envelop me. In fact, the discipline of comparative literature was born as an attempt to counter such superiority complexes. The one language, one culture, one nation model of Europe created strives and led to two consecutive world wars. The catastrophe that followed created a crisis for the entire human civilization. Comparative literature was wished for as a way of engaging in dialogues transcending the boundaries of national literatures, parochial nationhoods, the hunger for more power and control over others. Comparative literature was conceived as a way to bridge the gaps that existed among cultures, among people. However, it should be mentioned that in the Indian context, the relation between national literature and comparative literature is not the same as in Europe. As we have already pointed, in the absence of any one singular Bharatiya language or Indian language, comparative literature becomes the way, the only way to arrive at the notion of Indian literature. To rephrase, whereas in Europe, comparative literature is thought to be the way of surpassing and negating national literatures, in India, comparative literature is an effective way to create national literature, to create Indian literature. Anyone can understand that just by adding all the literary canons in all the languages in India, we cannot get the concept of Indian literature. This cannot be an additive process. For that, we have to delve deeper. We have to look at the interactions and exchanges that are taking place among the language cultures continuously. That interliterary process is the site of comparative literature in India. And only by understanding that process, we can seek to know what is Indian literature. Being composed in Marathi, Gujarati, English, Tamil, Manipuri, Urdu, and so on, what makes one literary text Indian? That is the question. There is not much scope to deliberate upon finer questions like whether it should be termed as Indian literature in a singular or Indian literatures in the plural. But for the time being, let us just remember that we are practicing comparative literature knowingly or unknowingly whenever we are thinking about Indian literature, or for that matter, whenever we are thinking about our own literature, we are actually practicing comparative literature. We have inherited a rich and unique heritage of syncretic and pluralistic culture. And now it is upon us to preserve that, further that. This is not only true about literatures and cultures, comparative literature permeates our lives as well. Only by respecting the other, I can begin the journey to understand my own self. As Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore would say, this is a journey from the Choto Ami to the Boro Ami, from the little self to the greater self. I am standing at a station for a certain train to catch. Meanwhile, trains are coming from unknown places and going to destinations I am not so sure about. Trains with compartments full of texts, concepts, and cultures. They are affecting me in tangible and intangible ways. In fact, they are shaping me. They are making me, myself, in innumerable ways. Ultimately, maybe I catch my train, but is it the same me? Or has the waiting transformed me significantly? Maybe my destination itself has changed. In a way, this moment of waiting at the station, this transition, spans my entire life. We are continuously experiencing this flux of texts, concepts, ideas, and people. Comparative literature is a way of dealing with this flux of texts, concepts. It is about the valley in between the self and the other. It is about creating relationships and honest and respectful সংলাপ or discussion. Let me finish by quoting a couple of my favorite lines. This is from a letter by Rabindranath Tagore, a personal letter. I'm just quoting one sentence. The idea of India is against the intense consciousness of the separateness of one's own people from others, which inevitably leads to ceaseless conflicts. Thank you for bearing with me and my ramblings for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. And uh, I'm really, I'm speechless because I really don't know that how can I gather myself to ask you any question, or uh, I am not that much what I can say. Like, still, I am in a state of trance to what I can say, like to absorb the intellectual discourses which you have presented to us. Uh, we, I think all the participants, they liked, they enjoyed your lecture to a great extent. They are also in the same state of trance. That's why we don't have any question right now. But uh, I would like to say something like, though my knowledge is very limited or meager, but sir, as you are talking about cultural plurality, or the terms what you have used, plurilingualism and pluriculturalism. So, do you think, sir, when we are talking about of creating a national language, don't it sound political? And the second, a small question, maybe it sounds futile or meaningless, but the second question which I have, that then when we are talking about what I have understood about the plurality in the field of culture, then how can we situate Derrida in in this particular discourse in terms of deconstruction?
Okay. Uh, these are, I think, incisive questions and very important ones too. Let me take one by one. As I understand, plurilingualism, how to sustain plurilingualism when we are talking about a national literature. So, this idea of national is significantly different from the idea of nationalism in Europe. In Europe, in a catastrophe ridden, war devastated Europe, comparative literature was uh, envisaged as a way to transcend the nationalist parochial boundaries of single literature nations. So, to counter superiority complexes, counter power hungry people. So, it was trying to create sort of a dialogue, a conversation between different cultures. But in India, interestingly, I have tried to just raise the issue here. In India, we don't have a national literature as such. We cannot name any given language Indian without first creating a standard of Indianhood or Indianness. So, and you cannot call an additive process to be a national literature. You cannot add Bangla with Maithili, with Nepali, with Tamil, and then call the concoction Indian literature. We have to delve deeper and we have to think about commonalities, common structures of feeling, genres, texts, literary movements that kind of characterize the Indian literatures in general. So here, comparative literature is not denial of national literature. Comparative literature becomes the first step, the way to arrive at the idea of national literature, arrive at the idea of Indian literature as such. So I think that's for the first issue I have raised. The second question is so vast. I don't know whether to go into that territory of Derridian post-structuralism. Basically, there is a huge misconception about the term deconstruction because people often conflate it with destruction. Deconstruction is the opposite of that. Uh, Maybe it's very mundane, but I try to make my students understand this concept by an example. The way of looking at a construction a posteriori, that can be called the process of deconstruction. So, how to understand a particular configuration, a construction? It may be literary, cultural, social, religious, anything. So, the way you look at the process of construction, you close read it, you are practicing deconstruction. So, we all are actually practicing deconstruction without even knowing it, without naming it so. Whenever we close read a poem or a play, we are deconstructing because we are looking at similes, metaphors, imageries, texts, words, sentences. So, comparative literature is all about close reading. In that way, you can say that comparative literature actually looks at structures of feelings. Can we ascribe any structure? Maybe it's temporary, it's tentative, it's unsure, uncertain, but still, the structures of feelings, that is the goal, that is the motto of comparative literature. Is that anyway answering your
Yes,
issue?
sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
thank you
Thank
for
you
your
all.
talk. And
Thank
now we will be having the last